Hey, hello, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of October, year 2022. I need you all to be very aware of something straight from the get-go in this video. I had a horrible reading month. I read a book so bad this month that it had me altering how I will read for the rest of my life. Do not say this lightly. This is not a joke. This is not like a catch. After reading a certain book this month, I went onto my Goodreads and I went to my want to read shelf and I had about 1,100 books on that shelf and I cycled through them and I got rid of 400 of them. Now on my want to read shelf, it's like 750 books. I was changed. I was changed this month. Further proof that this month was the worst month of my life. I read 11 books this month and not a single book got over a 3.5 star. I struggled this month. I didn't struggle to read. I was actively reading and I was actively searching books out and I genuinely felt like I was enjoying the process of reading, but I did not enjoy a single book that I put my eyes or ears on. That's a lie. There was one that I liked, but I had a lot of issues with how it ended. And then there were two that I enjoyed, but they just weren't great. First up, I did read Lore Olympus Volume 1, and then later in the month, I did read Volume 2. So I'll just talk about them at the same time. I didn't really care for this one. I'm not gonna lie. It didn't work for me. There were a lot of issues that I had with this story and with this book. I was interested enough about things that happened at the very end of it that I did continue on to book 2, and I'm glad I did that. This whole series is a Hades and Persephone retelling. Persephone is young, basically a teenager going to college for the first time, and so she comes into Olympus for the first time, and when she goes to like her first party, she runs into Hades, who through a mishap she ends up at his house one evening, and then it starts like the gossip columns and everything talking about them, and it's going to eventually be their love story. But I had some issues. So I rated this one somewhere between a 2 and a 2.5. I think it was kind of a 2.5 just because of something that happens kind of at the end, because I wasn't expecting the author to get me as interested in like the hook at the end as she did, but most of this story I like couldn't stand. I was struggling to get through a bit of it. And then I picked up Volume 2 because why not? My friend lent them to me. I had them. I was interested enough, and I enjoyed this one a lot more. It addressed a lot of the issues that I had in Volume 1 and brought light to them, so I didn't feel like I was just reading something problematic or made me feel icky. At least I knew the author was aware of it and had done it intentionally and was going to deal with it, even if they weren't all dealt with in this volume. So I had a much more fun time reading this one, and I ended up rating it a 3-star exactly. Up next, I read Shallow Graves, which is actually a book I had tried a while ago. I want to say over a year ago, and I didn't really like the first chapter, so I DNF'd it, and it was like, whatever. At the beginning of October, I realized that I hadn't put any horror on my TBR, so I decided to give this one a shot a second time, because I was like, of one chapter, let's just like try it again really quickly, and I finished it, and I really enjoyed it. This is one of the ones where I said I liked it, but it had some things that I just like couldn't really get into it. This book is about a young girl who is awoken from death. She's like dug up. She had been killed mysteriously and left in an unmarked grave, and this man digs her up and she kills him because she can sense his mistakes and can tell that he is a murderer and that he has done horrible things, and he's waking her up for not great reasons, and so she kills him. And then she starts off in the beginning going about killing other people who have done horrible things, and it kind of turns into her realizing that the whole entire like paranormal underground society is alive and flourishing in the dark of the human world, and she starts to learn more about it and try to figure things out about this world and try to make the best place for herself there, because she's not human and she can't go back to being a human. This book reminded me a lot of Rebecca Schaeffer's The Monster Market. Oh my god, I always forget the name of the series, but the first book is Not Even Bones, because it has that kind of like underground paranormal in the shadows of like the real world vibe. But what really got me with this book to not be fully into it is kind of like the jointedness of the two different sections of the book. When you're reading the first half of the book, it's a completely different book than the second half of the book. And the book is so short that I felt like I didn't have enough time to really get into the paranormal side of the world. I never say this, but I'm gonna say it for this one. I think this book would have been way better as a series, because she has the first whole entire book where we know nothing about this paranormal world and our character is just trying to figure things out and is just going off killing these horrible people, which is so much fun to read. But then there's such a weird tonal shift, and it's cool, it's great. I loved being in the tonal shift, but you don't get to see that world. You don't get to see much of it, and you don't get to stay with it for very long. So I would have liked to have had that be just a little bit more of a focus. Overall though, I did have a fun time and I would recommend it. I think it was fun. I think it was, there was some horrifying concept. It wasn't scary, but horror doesn't have to be scary. There were some things it had to say that I liked. I liked some of the messages. So I ended up rating that one a 3.5. Up next, I read The Cemetery Boys, and I read this book. I started out because I was interested. This was another horror that I was like, okay, I don't have any horror on my TBR. Let's like grab a couple of short audiobooks, throw them in here. And I started it and I was like, okay, this isn't great, but I'm at least curious, because it did the thing where like the prologue at the beginning is actually the ending. So you like, how are we going to get here? So I was interested enough. And then as I was listening, because I did do the audio, I got so far into it that I was like, this book is horrible, but I only have so many hours left. Like I might as well finish it. And every single moment that I continued on with this book, I hated it more and more and more. Like, it was so bad. It was so bad. Anyways, let me explain what it's about. So it is about this young boy who his father and him moved to this town because his mother has to go to intensive care for mental issues that she is having, and her father can no longer support the medical bills. So the father moves back in with his mother, who lives in this like backwards town, this like small town that is awful. Like homophobic, racist, all of the ists, right? Our main character has to move with his father because he's only in high school. And when he gets there, he meets these two kids who are twins. One's a boy, one's a girl. The boy and him pretty much instantly become friends, and the girl and him pretty much instantly become a romantic pairing. And they're like the only people in this town who are cool and interesting enough. And as he's getting to know these kids and the town, he starts to realize that everyone believes in these like winged demon creatures that if they start showing up and causing chaos, it means that like things are going to get worse and worse and worse. And the town believes that you have to sacrifice someone in order to make the bad things stop happening. I think my biggest issue with this book, besides the fact that it was predictable and there was a few like plotting, pacing issues, whatever, I can get over that. My biggest issue was the main character. He was like the epitome of when you have like a YA female character who's like, I'm not like other girls, I'm cooler. That was him. That was freaking, oh my God, he drove me insane. I wanted to kill him. I don't remember all of the things that like drove me insane about this character, but I like, for instance, I'll give you one specific thing that I can remember, and then we're moving on because I can't with this book. This one point, our main character was like, oh, I don't fit in with any groups. I run, but I'm not athletic enough to be a jock. Or I play video games, but I'm not obsessed with things, so I can't be a nerd. And I like music, but I'm not crazy about it, so I can't be like a band kid, whatever. Like he kept giving these examples of like how he was good at something, but like he wasn't like cringy good at it. And so therefore he wasn't like able to be put into a box or a category. And therefore he wasn't like the other kids in his life. And I just freaking, oh, of course, the whole romantic relationship was just like, it was disgusting. It was disgustingly fast and disgustingly quick. And I have no idea why this girl had any interest in this guy. Don't read that book. It will be on my worst books of the year, which is funny because there are other books on this list later that will also be on my worst books of the year. Up next, I read Babel by R.F. Kuang. Everyone pretty much read it this month or the month before. And I don't have a ton to say about this book. I didn't enjoy it. I rated it a 2.5. I really, really loved the first chunk, like 5 stars, loved the first chunk. And then the book just didn't go where I thought it was going, and I didn't like where it went. Like, that's the best I can sum that up. My issue with the pacing is how slow everything happened. I can enjoy a slow book. I can enjoy a dark academia book. I can't enjoy a book that doesn't progress. And I know this is going to be a super unpopular opinion because I said it on TikTok and it was an unpopular opinion, but it is my opinion, so I'm going to say it. I didn't like any of the characters because I felt like they were flat. Like we had no growth, no development, nothing came from them. I don't understand why people like obsess over this book. I think there were a lot of really good things it had to say. I think it did some things effectively, but I think it missed the mark in a lot of places. I feel like I went into this book expecting something a lot different, and that is on me. Like, you can't go into a book expecting it to be one thing and the book was never going to be that thing and then get mad at it. I understand that, but I just feel like she was very lacking in a lot of areas. I rated it 2.5. Honestly, it was closer to a 2-star. It's fine because next I read probably the worst book of this year. Let's see. Actually, yeah, it did get a lower rating than Cemetery Boys. And that is A Little Life. This one was a journey for me. I read up until about here. I was going to rate this book a 5-star. I was so invested, so into it. I loved seeing what I thought was the growth and development of these 4 boys who are friends. I didn't explain what this was about. I didn't explain what Babbel was about. I'm going to assume you know what Babbel's about because it's all over the online. I'm going to assume you know what this book is about because it's also all over the online. I should have listened to people who said, don't read this book. Watching a bunch of people talk about this book and then actually reading this book are 2 different experiences. And I don't want to focus on this book for very long because I genuinely believe that this book is harmful and problematic. And I genuinely believe that the author had a mockery of people who are disabled, people with pain, people with trauma. I don't think she did a good job. I don't think she accurately did anything. I don't think she cared. I don't think she was writing a book because she wanted to tell a story. I think she wrote a book because she wanted to hurt people who were going to be reading this book. I got to a point where things were so sad and traumatic and awful that I could no longer feel sad and traumatic and awful, and I was just laughing. I was like, the last 300 pages of this book, I hated it. I hated it because she just didn't do it for a reason. She didn't cause pain for a purpose. She was causing pain just to make the audience feel pain. Read a bunch of reviews online because I was very conflicted about how people enjoyed this book. And a lot of people were saying things like, oh, it's painful, but it's not grotesque. It's grotesque. It's disgusting and it's awful and it's grotesque, and this author has no place writing books. And the fact that I have now looked into her other books that she has written, and I have seen that she does not care about anything and that she is disgusting with lots of different things, makes me appalled that this book won awards and that people are worshiping it and are obsessed over her writing. I feel like the more I complain, it will convince other people to read it. And I don't want anyone else to read it. If you haven't read this book, don't read it. It makes fun of people who are in pain. And it's cruel. And it's not a fun ride. Even the cover itself and the name of the book are a mockery of people who experienced sexual trauma. I'm done. I'm done. I'm so annoyed at this. I don't want to go into depth about the whole entire analysis of the name and the cover, but if you're like genuinely seriously curious, put a comment down below, and whoever comments the first time, I will like respond with what's going on with those 2 things. Up next, I read Other Words for Smoke, which I read for my book club. And this is the other one where I was like, I enjoyed myself, but it wasn't a perfect book, so nah. This one's really hard to explain. So it's about these 2 twins who their parents are going through an awful divorce, and you follow them over 2 summers as they go to live with their great aunt. And she is a witch, but like their parents didn't know. She's not like known in this world to be a witch. It's very magical realism, like under the covers, whatever. While they're there, their great aunt is also like warding another young girl, and there is kind of this like demon thing that lives in the walls, and then there's also this like talking cat. There's a lot of like really fun aspects, and you're following them on 2 different summers. So the first summer is when their parents are like starting to have issues, and the second summer is when they're like going through their divorce. I forget how many years apart they are, but let's call it like 4. And in the first summer, the girl that the grandma is warding runs into a lot of issues with the demons in the wall, and that causes some problems, which they think gets resolved. And then when the kids come back for another summer, they realize it did not resolve any of the issues. I genuinely understand that this book had some issues. especially with pacing. It's very slow. It's very boring at times. I wouldn't like necessarily recommend this to anyone, to be honest, but I had an enjoyable enough time. I liked the magical realism aspects, and I really liked the ending. I feel like the ending did a turn where it made you realize that love isn't always enough and that fear shouldn't rule your life. It had this really cool part where you kind of like go in between the walls with this like demon thing at certain points, and it's like this never ending world of like rooms, and as you like go from room to room to room, they're all so different and you get to spend so little time there. One of the things that I found really intriguing about this book is you're at a distance from the magic. A lot of times magical realism will start you at a distance and then you'll get right up close with it and you'll get to see so much of it. And we did get up close to the magic in this book, but I, as the reader, never once felt like I was part of the magic. And I could see how that would annoy a lot of people, but I really enjoyed this like idea, this concept that there's something bigger out there and I will never understand it because I am not part of that magical world, and neither are the twins. They are also kept at a distance from it. I rated it a 3.5. I had a good enough time reading it, but it was not perfect by any means. There were a lot of issues, and I think the author genuinely could have done better, but also like I'm not complaining. It was one of the best books I read this month. Up next, I read Tread of Angels by Rebecca Schaefer? Why do I think that's wrong? I think that's right. Rebecca Roanhorse. That's right. She wrote one of my favorite ongoing series, which is funny because I didn't rate either of the books like necessarily highly, but I enjoyed both of them so much, which is The Sixth World. It's not the one that everyone knows her for. Everyone knows her for Black Sun, but I personally really, really love her Trail of Lightning series. It has so much potential, and that's what I love about it. This book feels like a book. Trail of Lightning feels like an opportunity. She wrote a novella, which is coming out in November, and I got the ARC from the publisher, and I'm so excited that I did because I wanted it so bad. Like, I kept checking in almost daily on NetGalley to see if I had gotten it or not. And then I was kind of bummed because I didn't end up enjoying it, which is a short novella. I think it's like 100 pages coming out in November, and it's an urban Wild Wild West fantasy where there are angels and demons, and it is after like the fall of angels, so how demons came to exist, and there are humans and there are angels and demons, and then there are creatures who are mixed, and we're following two sisters who are mixed, and so they're called, what are they called? They are mixed, and so they're not really accepted by anyone, and so they're kind of just making the best lives for themselves. And then the sister, so not the one we're following, is accused of murdering one of the like high angels, and so she is like arrested and put on trial, and her sister is the one who is going to defend her. Now, I thought that most of this book was going to be like the two of them in court, like defending. Most of the book is like it's like 3 days, maybe 2 days. This book is really short time period wise, and most of it is our main sister, who did not get accused of the crime, going out and trying to figure out who actually did this crime, because she doesn't believe that her sister did it. So I want to say it's like 48 hours total that this book takes place. And then once she gets her proof, there are like a chapter at the end where she goes to court and tries to defend her sister. I didn't love it, and I think that the reason why I didn't love it is because I wasn't ready for the setting. It's very reminiscent of books like Crescent City or House of Night. Is that the one by Holly Black? And even though it's like Wild Wild West times, like 1800s, so it's not modern like those two books, it had the feel of those two books. And neither of those books I enjoyed. I don't want you to like hear those two books and be like, oh, I loved those two books, let me go read this book, because I don't know if you would like this one, because both of those books have a lot of romance, and this book had a romance in it, but it was not focused on at all. It was not really a major part of the book. It had those like, there's paranormal things alongside the real world that we're used to, except the real world we're used to is in the 1800s. I found it predictable, like very predictable from the beginning. I was really interested in the whole angel demon dynamic, and then I just kind of got bored of it because I feel like we didn't have enough intrigue into it. And the writing's good. She's a great writer. The thing that I found really, really good about the book that made me like wish that the rest of it had worked for me was there were so many times I saw the symbolism of half creatures being compared to people who in America, when the white people came and tried to breed the color out of the native groups here, and then you have these children who are not really a part of either community. That was a lot of what I saw, which makes sense. Rebecca Roanhorse is a native author. She's an indigenous author. She does not hide that. A lot of her books heavily focus on those themes. And I saw in this one that specific idea, and I loved how she did it. There was this whole entire paragraph that I like will not forget, where she talked about how the people, the half beings, how their art and their culture was not enough. And it was beautiful. Absolutely fantastic. The book was short. I recommend you read it. Like, it's so short, why not? But it wasn't like great either. So like, go into it knowing that. Go read Trail of Lightning and just have yourself a grand old time. Up next, I read Dead Silence. I didn't love this one either. So this is kind of a sci-fi thriller mixed together, which was fun. That aspect was enjoyable. It's about this crew, this ship, when they're out like kind of in like unknown space and they're figuring some things out and they're about to come back and they hear a distress beacon, and when they go to pick it up, it's this ship that's been missing for like 40 plus years, and it's this big royalty rich people cruise line basically, but like in space. Everyone has always been looking for this ship because it holds so much wealth on it, and so they find it and they have to board it in order to get like enough proof that when they go back they can claim everything on it. And when they get onto the ship, of course everyone is dead and things are weird and they are trying to figure out, oh my god, what happened? So that's kind of you can see how like the thriller and the mystery came together. There is a part where you're following our main character at a different timeline, and she is like in a future timeline and she is looking back on these events, and she is in a psych ward where the police are investigating what's going on, and she's trying to tell them her story, but she's missing a lot of pieces. Sounds great, sounds fun. The author did not execute it well. It's supposed to be a sci-fi horror, but I categorize it as a sci-fi thriller because there quite literally was never a horrifying moment. You never get to actually see the horror. It's described as something over there that you are not a part of. There was this part where they literally were like, oh, you're gonna have to go investigate all these rooms and the lights are gonna be flickering and it's gonna be dark, and our main character blacks out and we never get to see that. We do get to investigate the rooms, yes, that happens, but never like in that high intensity horrifying moment. Yeah, there's a lot of like dead bodies floating around, and there's a lot of things that like could be considered graphic. Okay, I get it, whatever. And as I said earlier, horror doesn't have to mean scary. I get it. But this book didn't work for me, and it didn't work for me on so many levels. There were moments where I was having a really good time. There were moments where I was really invested. Thrillers do that to you, where you're like in suspense and you just want to know what happens next. And that's how I felt through most of this book. I hated our main character. She basically was this woman who went through this horrible traumatic experience as a young child, absolutely, but then tried to act like no one else in the entire world was allowed to have trauma. She quite literally said to a person at one point that they weren't able to hallucinate because she has hallucinations and she knows what they really are, and there's no way that person could have hallucinations. How the heck are you going to gatekeep hallucinations? Also, the whodunit, the twist, the surprise, awful, god awful, so boring. It made me really want to go read a good sci-fi because this was not a good sci-fi. This is not a good book. But I did rate it 3 stars because I was hooked through most of it. There were parts where I was like, man, I don't know. I should probably lower that rating, to be honest, because of how horribly I'm going to continue to speak about this book. Okay, I'm going to do my last 2 books out of order because I want to end on a banger. The last book I read this month, but not the last book we're going to talk about, was Battle Royale. And I'm so glad I finally read this book, because I've been wanting to read it ever since I found out that it was the influence for the Hunger Games, which I love the Hunger Games. I don't have it on these shelves. I have it downstairs. I have a bookshelf. I love all 3 books. I don't talk about the 4th one. It doesn't exist. But I love them. I love the movies. I'm a huge fan. Huge fan. So I've always wanted to read The Inspiration. That is one of my favorite, like, tropes, elements to a story where you have a bunch of people who have to go into an arena together and fight to the death. And you're like, how are we going to escape? Blah, blah, blah. So Battle Royale is the inspiration. It is a Japanese, it was translated to English. I read the English, of course. I had a really enjoyable time. This is the book that I was saying like, oh, I was really enjoying it, but there were just a few things. I really, really loved this book, and it would have been a 4-star if the ending hadn't done what it did. In this world, a dystopian, so the whole entire world isn't exactly how we're used to it, but there's this country called the, I want to say it's like the Northeastern Asian Alliance, something like that. And there are reasons for it, but every year they take 50 middle school classes. I believe they're either like 7th or 8th grade equivalent to America. Let's call it 8th grade. They take 50 8th grade classes and they put them individually into each arena, and they make the kids fight to the death. And there are certain reasons why the kids can't just like ignore the rules. They have these collars that will kill them if they go out of bounds or if no one dies within 24 hours of the game. They have to play these games. And there are 42, I want to say 42 kids in our main character's class. And of course their class gets taken for this, it's called the program. I think this book did a lot of really fantastic things, but the ending lost me. I also think the length of it lost me. It was just like a little bit too long for my taste. We're mainly following this one character who I can't stand, and he is like aghast about the program. I can't believe that anyone would like go and kill their classmates. Every single time a character dies, we get to switch to their POV. So we get to see every single kid that dies in this program's death. We get to experience that. And the reason why I think it was so effective is because the whole entire reason why the author wrote this book was to comment on reality TV and to comment on the fact that people will be invested in anything. Suzanne Collins did a great job. I love The Hunger Games. Boy, if I had gotten to see all of the POVs in that book, oh my God, I feel like anyways, so I loved that. The book is easy to read. It is so freaking easy to read. Like I felt like I couldn't put it down. The first day I read 150 pages and I like came to and I was like, oh my God, like it's nighttime. I need to stop reading and like do stuff with my life. I loved that. I loved reading it. I was so into it, so invested, such an enjoyable time. And then the ending just, oof, it was so bad and it was so rushed. For this book being, I think it's like close to 600 pages, he spread everything out for so long, and then the ending was like 2 chapters. Editing Amanda, I want to briefly mention here something that I like completely forgot to talk about when it comes to Battle Royale, which is this author also has strong themes of like homophobia and misogyny. So he clearly was not trying to be negative towards women, but he puts all women into a stereotype, and just, it was kind of gross to read a few times. I also need to point out that this book was written in a very different time, so he obviously thought that these things were okay to say and write and think, and it wasn't so horrible that it ruined my experience reading this book, but it was enough where I just was rolling my eyes every single time a female character came on page. And then there's one queer character and he gets like 1 chapter. It's not much at all, but it was like enough for me to be like, okay, this guy clearly has never once in his life met a queer person. Would I reread it? Maybe in a few years, but I don't think this will be a book that I like reread a lot actively. I'm seeking for it. So the final book that I want to talk about, which is the book that changed my life, is Belladonna. I think it might be Belladonna. I think I just need a moment of silence, guys. First off, let's start at the beginning. I rated this book a 1 star. I don't fully believe that this book deserves a 1 star. I think that it's probably closer to a 2 star on my rating scale, but I got so fed up with it at certain points that I couldn't in good conscience rate it a 1 star or a 2 star. This book is about a young girl who has been followed by death her entire life, and she finds that she cannot die, and everyone around her seems to die, and she is sent to this manor to live with some family. She's like been sent to family to family to family to family because she is orphaned and each of them dies, and so finally she is sent to this manor and she's going to be taught about like high society, and she's worried that they're going to die, and because someone that she is staying with there gets very sick. And so she starts to try to figure out who's killing this person. And she can see death and communicate with death and talk with death. The two of them kind of team up to figure out who's killing the person that she cares about. If you like YA fantasy, you're probably going to enjoy this book. I see no issue with you enjoying this book. Here's where I need to start explaining why this book changed my life. So for a while now, if you've been on my channel for a long time, if you have heard me talking about YA fantasy, I have been saying that I do not enjoy YA fantasy. I keep rereading it because I used to enjoy YA fantasy when I was the target audience for YA fantasy. Really, the past year have been sick and tired of me saying, I don't enjoy YA fantasy, but I'm giving this one a shot, because I feel like I keep searching out that feeling I had when I was a child and I was reading YA fantasy, but I'm never going to feel that again. I'm never going to feel that again. Have I read some really banging YA fantasy books? Absolutely. Absolutely I have. Has it been more than 5 to 10? No, not in my adult life. I can't get past a lot of the issues that I see in the genre. And so therefore, I went through my entire Goodreads and I removed every single YA fantasy. Not every single. I removed 99% of the YA fantasy from my want to read shelf. I did leave a couple. There are some that I am genuinely interested in beyond the fact that it's just going to be a book that's in a genre I used to like. I also removed quite a few new adult fantasy because I'm sick and tired of something this book did. Something happened to me in my life this month, and I'm not going to go into details about it. I will say that right now, me and my family are safe, but something big happened. It has made me very aware of grooming and pedophilia. And this book, in my very personal opinion, has both of those things. And I am sick and tired of reading books where a 500 plus immortal being has romantic relations with a teenage girl. I know it's like a thing. I know that a lot of people enjoy it. Go enjoy your book. I do not care. You can read whatever you want. Like I said, had something happen to me, and it has left me with the inability to enjoy that trope ever again in my life. Without going into details, something happened to someone very close to me, and I believe I will be forever changed on how I view things. It just so happened to be right before I was reading this book. So I don't want to say that this book was like the worst thing ever. I want to say that part of why I hated this book so much was because of the experience I was having in my life outside of this book. If this book had not contained the elements that were happening in my life outside of this book, I wouldn't have felt the same exact way. So in this book, our main character at birth meets death, and then he follows her throughout her entire life. And he is always there for her and always watching out for her, and kind of at a distance at first, but then really up close affects large elements of how she gets to be where she is. And they romantically get together. There is a love triangle. I hate how the love triangle ended. Hate it. But she gets with death, romantically, physically, whatever. And he is an immortal being, and she is an 18-year-old girl. I know 18 is an adult, but he followed her from the time she was born. He watched out for her. He 100% affected her decision. And because she cannot die, she has these like gifts. You don't know how she gets the gifts, but death is going to tutor her and teach her how to use her gifts. And he 100% says he will not teach her unless they are like together, hanging out together, interacting with each other. What does that sound like to you? Disgusting. Absolutely vile. So I understand that I am like sensitive to that topic right now. And I understand that I don't want to say I overreacted, because for a long time now, for years now, I have not been enjoying YA fantasy. I have not been wanting to read it. I have been wanting to stop reading it, but sometimes they sound so good, amazing, and I just want to pick them up. And I've been thinking like, oh, maybe it's because I've been listening on audio and not physically reading. I'm done. I'm done making excuses. I'm done reading YA fantasy. So I removed about 400 books. I don't think YA fantasy is a bad genre. Like I said, I really loved it, and I really think it is just not for me. It was good. It needed to happen. I want to be very clear here. I am not giving up on YA completely. Absolutely not. I did not remove any YA contemporary or any YA magical realism or any YA horror. YA horror is still one of my favorite genres ever. I prefer YA horror to adult horror. I'm not saying that books written for teens are less good. I am not saying that books targeted at younger audiences aren't as well developed. I think what I'm trying to say is YA fantasy has become such a trope-filled environment that I have a hard time distinguishing the books from each other, and they start to feel like carbon copies. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And I have issue with that. And I have issue with all of them having kind of the same development. And I have major issues with all of them requiring romance. Because as someone who identifies as asexual, who is considering identifying as aromantic, romance does not have to be in every single book, and I don't think it should be shoved down the throats of teens. If they enjoy it, absolutely let them read it. But oh my God, let there be books where it is not present. And oh my God, grooming is a topic that you can write about, but you should not be glorifying it in a book that is targeted at teenagers. Go do whatever you want. I don't care. This is just me kind of ranting at the end of this video. So those are all the books that I read in October. It was a horrible month, horrible experience. Can't wait to read a 5-star. I deserve to read a 5-star like soon. Even just a 4-star. I'll take a 4-star. That's it. I'm done talking. I hope you're doing well. I appreciate you. I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I'll talk to you in the comments. Bye.